that I wrote this novel that this movie is based on. Most of it here in Austin, starting like way back in the early aughts, and it was published about 7 years ago now, in 2011, and about 3 years ago, almost exactly, is when I found out that Steven Spielberg was going to direct the movie, and it's been the 3 craziest years of my life. Initially, when they told me that he was going to consider reading it, then I got really excited for about 5 minutes, and then I got really depressed. Because I assumed that he would read the book and read the screenplay and then decide not to do it, and then I would have to spend the whole rest of my life imagining what it would have been like if Steven Spielberg had made Ready Player One. And every day that went by, I didn't hear the news. I assumed that was what was going to happen. But then, magically, after the 2 longest weeks of my life, I found out he had said yes, and then like the past 3 years has just been like 3 of the coolest, most exciting years of my life. You know, Steven Spielberg helped inspire this story in the novel. The main character, Wade, he carries a Grail diary through the whole story to collect his clues for the Easter egg hunt, which is because of Indiana Jones, and he drives a DeLorean, just like I do, because of Back to the Future, which Steven Spielberg produced. So my whole life and the whole book would have been different if I hadn't grown up watching Steven Spielberg movies. So it's just the craziest thing ever to me, that he ended up directing the movie. And once they said that it was a possibility, then I just couldn't get that out of my head. I couldn't think of anything cooler. And now that I've been through the experience, I just assume that the whole rest of my life is just downhill from here on out, because nothing could ever top this. I've racked my brain. I'm a creative person. I can't think of anything that could top. George Lucas isn't going to come out of retirement and direct one of my books, so I'm just assuming that I'm trying to enjoy this as much as possible. I appreciate you guys coming out to enjoy it with me. If anybody has any questions, you, sir? He's asking about my second novel, Armada, which got picked up by Universal Pictures, and like Ready Player One, I wrote the first couple drafts of the screenplay. It's very hard being the novelist who comes up with the story, and then you finish the story exactly the way that you want it, and then when it comes time to make it into a movie, you have to change a lot of things. All of my favorite book-to-film adaptations, had to make serious changes to the source material, which is hard when you're the person who came up with the story. That's why there's not a lot of crossover I've discovered between novelists and screenwriters. It's 2 very different mediums with different strengths and weaknesses, so you have to, you kind of have to tear apart the story and put it back together to make it fit so that you can tell it in 2.5 hours. But luckily, like with Warner Brothers, Universal Pictures bought Armada, and they're big fans of the book, and they have been great about including me. And I've talked with the writer who's going to rewrite my drafts and change things. Sometimes you need a little, like I had a great experience working with Zach Penn on this movie, the other screenwriter, not only because he, was someone whose own movies I really love and helped inspire me. Zach wrote Last Action Hero, which is one of the movies that inspired the idea of flick syncs in my novel, of going into your favorite genre of movie and then using your knowledge of that movie to navigate and survive. So it was crazy, by writing Ready Player One and making this movie, I ended up getting to work with a lot of people who helped inspire me to write that story. And I'm hoping I have the same, it's no way it's going to be as cool as this, but I'm hoping I have an equally fun experience with Armada. But they've been great, it's great to be a novelist / screenwriter. I feel like they include you more in the process, and you get to have more feedback. And this was amazing. I got included all the way through pre-production and filming. I got to go visit the set a bunch of times, and then all the way through post-production, I got to be consulted and help talk to ILM about things to sneak into like the New York race scene, and even make suggestions on the soundtrack. The end credits, the Hall & Oates, "You Make My Dreams Come True." I suggested that song because my wife and I used it in our wedding after we got married, and Steven Spielberg liked that story so much that he put it in the movie. So, I know, nothing ever is going to top this. So it's all downhill. You, sir? Is this what I envision the future state of virtual reality and AI? Well, already I've turned out to be wrong. Just in the 7 years since I've written this book, it's happened. Virtual reality has evolved much more quickly than I anticipated, partly because of the existence of my novel. It's crazy in a way that it's almost become like a self-fulfilling prophecy. My novel was published
in the summer of 2011, which was the same time that Oculus was founded, and the very first commercial VR headset that had ever been available came on the market. And the people who worked at Oculus, including the founder, Palmer Luckey, everybody recommended my book to them because it dealt with virtual reality, and they became big fans of it. And then they told me they started to hand it out to new employees, and they still do that now at HTC Vive too. They give Ready Player One out to people who are going to work in virtual reality to help get them excited about it. So, but that's, I think just pretty minor influence of the book, and the influence of this movie is going to be much larger. People all around the world are getting exposed to the whole concept of virtual reality and its potential because of this movie. And I think are going to be inspired to try it out and maybe work on it. So, it could end up happening. I think it's going to happen a lot sooner. We already have haptic suits and haptic gloves. They're really primitive to what you see here, but I don't think it's going to take 30 more years for them to evolve to the state that you see in the movie. I already have 3 different virtual reality headsets at home. I have an Oculus, a Vive, and a PlayStation VR. And PlayStation is the best-selling one because it's real simple. You just plug it into your PlayStation console, and then you can try out VR. And that's kind of what I imagine in the novel. You don't need any computer experience. It's just a peripheral, something that you plug in, and then you can try escape to another world. And you can already kind of do that in 2018. So you imagine, 30 years from now, where you think about how video games have evolved in the past 30 years, from Pong to Call of Duty, in 30 years, another 30 years, then I think we'll have something even cooler in the Oasis, which is really scary. World of Warcraft already addictive now in 2018, so once you go into the Oasis version of that, then it'll be even harder to shut off. You, young man? Do I know how many Easter eggs are in the movie? I do not. I don't think anybody does, including the director, Steven Spielberg. I will tell you that, and it was because of the nature of the project, it was kind of everybody had permission to hide Easter eggs. Even the people who were dressing the sets would hide little things, references to Steven Spielberg movies. He kind of announced at the beginning of making the movie that even though he was a big part of the 80s, he didn't want to directly reference any of his movies. And so that immediately was like a challenge for all of us who were on the movie to try to sneak as much Steven Spielberg references into the movie without him noticing. And so that's why in the background of a bunch of scenes, like you'll see little nods to Indiana Jones or The Goonies, or and I know that Steven, when he was doing his very final run through of special effects shots, he spotted something he had never seen. He saw a gremlin. Somebody snuck a gremlin into one part of the battle, and he's like, oh, well, it's too late to take it out now. So even he doesn't know. And I, even this time, every time I watch it, I spot other things because it all goes by so quickly, and I don't think until the Blu-ray comes out, and this will be the most analyzed Blu-ray. It'll be like the Zapruder film. They'll just be going through it frame by frame, looking for stuff, but there's stuff hidden everywhere. So every time I watch the race, I spot new stuff. Tom Cruise's bar, Cocktails and Dreams, from the movie Cocktail. Any Cocktail fans? You can see that in the back of the race. I never noticed it before, but it was something I had suggested, and then they snuck it in. So you'll never. I don't know if all the Easter eggs will ever be found. That's a great question. Anybody else? You, sir, back there.
What was one thing from the book you kind of missed having to be taken out of the movie?
One thing from the book that I kind of missed. Well, one thing that I really thought we were gonna end up getting that we didn't was Ultraman, which is a kind of a Japanese superhero. And in my novel, Ultraman is what Wade uses to fight Mechagodzilla. And Steven Spielberg loved that idea. He knew of Ultraman 2, and we went and asked the company, Tsubiyara in Japan, who owned the rights to Ultraman. And because they were in the midst of, the timing was wrong, they happened to be in the midst of a legal battle over the foreign distribution rights of Ultraman with another company. And because of this lawsuit, neither one could give us clear title to Ultraman, even though they desperately wanted Ultraman to appear in a Steven Spielberg movie. That was the magic of having him direct this movie. If anybody else had directed it, I think it would have been a lot harder to get people to agree to let their stuff appear, but because it was Steven Spielberg, everybody, Sonic the Hedgehog, everybody said yes, we want to have our character be in this movie. And so the same thing happened with Ultraman, but it was just the bad timing. And the lawsuit ended up getting settled, but too late for us to use Ultraman. So what ended up being cool about that is, as a result of that, we had to find another giant robot to feature more. And so we ended up doing a little more with the Gundam, which is hugely popular in Japan, and then also the Iron Giant, which is my favorite change. I mentioned Iron Giant in the novel, just very briefly.
And that's because I'm friends with the writer of The Iron Giant, Tim McCandless, who lives right here in Austin. And he and I met 10 years ago on the WGA strike line during a Writers Guild strike. And I'm a huge fan of his movies. He did Secondhand Lions and a bunch of other great films as well. But Iron Giant is one of my favorites, and so I mentioned The Iron Giant in my novel just as a little reference to my friend Tim. And then when we were working on the movie and talking about other options, they saw The Iron Giant. They're like, oh, we own The Iron Giant. That's Warner Brothers. And Steven loved The Iron Giant and is a big fan of Brad Bird. Me and Zach both loved the idea. So The Iron Giant kind of got expanded into this bigger role. And now that's one of my favorite changes from the movie because I love that movie. It's a very Amblin-esque movie. I think The Iron Giant also kind of inspired a little bit by E.T. In Hogarth leads a trail of chunks of metal to lead the robot back to his home from the forest. And to me, that's always just like E.T. And Elliot leaving a trail of M&M. So I think even The Iron Giant a little bit inspired by Steven's films. And so the coolest thing about that for me is Tim McCandless, when The Iron Giant came out, it was not a big hit and nobody really went to see it and people discovered it on video. So he never saw people freak out about The Iron Giant until this movie came out. And now when he sees, like, when the trailer started to appear, people losing their mind over The Iron Giant, something that never happened when the movie originally came out. And he and I did a screening at the Alamo Drafthouse of The Iron Giant, and people lined up to have Iron Giant stuff autographed. And that was the first time he'd ever autographed anything related to the Iron Giant, because his character is kind of getting a resurgence because of this movie. So that's the long answer to your question. We had to change Ultraman to the Iron Giant, but I'm happy about that because it ended up kind of bringing the Iron Giant back. And a lot of people are discovering the Iron Giant now who didn't know about them before. You, young man. Yes, he's asking if in the book the first challenge is very different. In the book, the challenges are a lot more geeky, if that's possible, a lot more elaborate. And finding the gate is like one challenge, and then figuring out how to open the gate, and then another. So there's like a series of challenges. So we had to, because we're telling the story in a much briefer time, we had to change things, and also wanted to change things to make them more cinematic. In the novel, the first challenge involves reenacting an old Dungeons and Dragons module that like no one has ever played, and also doing some other video game challenges, stuff that is fun to read about in the book, but probably wouldn't be that fun to watch in a movie. Like I have one of them. One of the challenges is he plays a perfect game of Pac-Man, which takes like 6 hours. And even if you did a montage of somebody playing Pac-Man, still wouldn't be that much fun to watch. So we started talking about other kind of video game-esque challenges that would be more visually interesting, and that's when we came up with the idea of a race, which could still be a video game type of challenge, but like Super Mario Kart 2045, like the coolest future possible version of a racing game that still has Easter eggs and a secret that Wade has to figure out. So what we wanted to do is create new challenges that kind of capture the spirit of the challenges in the book while making it more fun to watch in a movie, and hopefully we did that. But the first two challenges are different. The second one is very different. In the book, we go into different movies, war games, and also a Monty Python movie. But here, we wanted something that had more uniquely visual style. So as soon as you went into the movie, have you ever seen The Shining before? Okay, your mom should not let you watch The Shining. Oh wow! I have all these friends. Like my kid walks out of Ready Player One. They're like 8 years old. They're like, I want to see The Shining, and their parents are like, nope, no, not for a while. You, young lady.
So, if Halliday wasn't an Avatar and Halliday's actually dead, then what is he?
That is an excellent question. We'll have to wait until Ready Player 2 to find out. I'll tell you that Steven Spielberg asked me that same question, and we had a long conversation about it, and that's why he put that scene in there. Because I'd already started talking, about the next story that I plan to write, and the ideas that I had for that. And so he is such a kind man. He set it up perfectly for me. So you'll have to wait and find out. Anybody else? You in the back there, sir?
Favorite Easter egg?
My favorite Easter egg. Well, people argue about what an Easter egg is. If it's just something that's kind of hidden in the frame for you to find. My favorite is, initially we didn't think there was going to be any Star Wars stuff because Disney was kind of standoffish about it, but near the end they kind of agreed, and then we got to stick Star Wars stuff in, and that's the stuff that's still surprising to me. It blows my mind that there's Star Wars and Star Trek stuff in this movie. But I love, my brother and I grew up playing Star Wars, and my first movie was about Star Wars fans, fanboys. And so this amazes me that there's an X-Wing and a TIE Fighter. I was telling my brother, since I'm the writer, I get to decide who's flying the X-Wing and TIE Fighter. And I've decided that it's he and I, because we used to play Star Wars when we were little kids. So when we're old men, when we're Steven Spielberg's age, that's us. We're flying that X-Wing and the TIE Fighter. So that's my favorite Easter egg I'm gonna say, which I just added to. You, sir?
Are there significance to the initials of the characters? I think one of the initials is WOW, and then I think Samantha's initials are SEC.
Yes, well, some of those, you know, like people have analyzed everything and find meaning and stuff that I didn't initially, but WoW was one. WoW is also World of Warcraft, so, and back in the 80s you wanted like a cool 3-letter initials, because you'd only put your initials into a game instead of a full word, so it was cool if you had like a 3-letter, you know, people would spell ass, you know, on old arcade. But if you had something cool like mine would be Ern, short for Ernie. But yeah, I don't, Samantha's name came from actually different people, was attributed to different people that I knew, so that was not intentional, but WoW was intentional. Just a few more, you young man. Yes, you.
I noticed that in the movie, the guy driving the truck actually said about Mario Kart. It's not.
Yes. H does mention about Mario Kart. That was like a Mario Kart reference. You caught it. But there's actually, I don't think too many, because we couldn't get clearance from Nintendo, so you see a lot of Sega stuff, but I don't see if we like most of the Nintendo references I think are visual. But actually now that I think about it, there are, there's Donkey Kong posters and stuff. So there are a few Nintendo references, but that's one of the main ones. Good catch. All right, one more question?
Ernie, right up there in the far corner.
In the far corner.
You, sir.
You
All right.
yes.
Yeah, so
Up there?
send.
You don't- wait, this young lady right here. Yes, you.
Young man.
Young man? Excuse me, I can't see too well.
Do you see yourself as a James Halliday or an Ogden Morrow?
Do I see myself as a James Halliday or an Ogden Morrow? Well, you know, those guys were kind of inspired by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who helped founded Apple. In tech industry, there's often like one guy who's super smart but not too good with people, you know, doesn't have a lot of social skills. But then the other one will be very good with people, but maybe not so good on the tech side. So I'll kind of modeled their relationship after those. I'm more like Wade, and I'm kind of the guy who grew up loving all this stuff and studying it like it was ancient history, you know, like studying Steven Spielberg movies or studying old Star Wars screenplays like I was studying, you know, ancient scripture. It was like my favorite thing. And same with old Dungeons and Dragons stuff. I was very much into the things that I love. I would study them endlessly, like Star Wars, and find out everything about how they made Star Wars and everything about the guy who made Star Wars. And so I'm very much like Wade. And when writing the story, it was a way for me to kind of celebrate. You know, that's the craziest thing about Steven Spielberg ended up making this movie, is because he was my, you know, one of my holidays, him and George Lucas, growing up. And I would study his movies, you know, and it was super creepy. It was like he had to hang out with one of his stalkers, you know, on the set of the movie. Whenever Steven Spielberg trivia, you know, like they were trying to stump me, like if I knew more about Steven than he knew about his own career, and sometimes I did. It was kind of scary. So, but maybe one more question, and you, sir, back there.
So since the book and the movie are so different in so many aspects, is this what you pictured the movie being like?
Yeah, you know, all of my favorite book-to-film adaptations make huge departures from the source material. They have to, you know. You know how many times in history a book-to-film adaptation has turned out exactly like the source material? Zero, ever. And that's never happened in history. So I don't know why people expected this was going to be the first time that it was exactly like the. You know, like Jaws, huge departures from the source material. One of the best movies ever made. Jurassic Park, same thing. Even Schindler's List, even Lincoln. You know, often times you have to, things that'll work on the page will not work in a movie, so you have to change things. And I think this is you know, no one else could have made a movie that is this close to the source material. I think it's the best possible adaptation. Some people, you know, will want a like 10-part miniseries that is exactly the same, but even that, you know, they just did that for Altered Carbon, which is one of my favorite science fiction novels. Just got a 10-episode Netflix series. They did a fantastic job. Changed a whole bunch of stuff. Even when you have a longer time to tell a story, you're still trying to tell it visually, and so you need to change things to tell the story visually as opposed to telling it on the page. So, you know, there might be, you know, they're making more Lord of the Rings, even though there's an Oscar-winning Lord of the Rings adaptation. Netflix just announced they're going to make more in that. So there's always the potential, you know, like I Am Legend is one of my favorite books by Richard Matheson, and that's been made into a movie like 3 or 4 different times. So things will always be readapted, and so there might be a future adaptation. But I'm pretty amazed with this adaptation. I think it's pretty great. Thank you guys so much for coming, and we're gonna form a line back